Hello guys and welcome to another Blackrock Foundry Mythic Guide by Method. Today we're talking about Hans'gar and Franzok, aka Hans and Franz. And if you've ever had a fantasy of getting stamped by a massive stamper, then this is the perfect fight for you.
Making waffles is their specialty, I heard. Franz and Franz, you're going to want to run 5 healers, 2 tanks, and the rest you fill the raid with DPS, which can again both be ranged or melee, but you still want to have an even split sort of, because we're going to need to split the raid up in 2 groups for our tactic.
Yeah, so because this fight has a lot of small phases that last very little time, it will be confusing if we just talk about all of the abilities and what's going on, so we're going to just take it step by step to make it easy to follow. At the beginning of the fight, and 2 more times in the whole fight, you're going to have a phase which we'll call Smart Stompers. How you want to handle that in terms of positioning is move the 2 bosses on top of each other and into one of the corners of the room. As you can see here, we're starting by positioning both bosses at the diamond marker. That's where all the melee DPS and the tanks are going to be. And the ranged DPSers and healers need to stand 2 blocks, 2 rectangles behind them.
Yeah, so as you take these positions, the Smart Stomper is going to be focusing on where you are standing. So since we have 2 groups, you can see the floor lighting up under us on both the melee and the ranged group. And after 8 seconds, the Stompers are going to be landing on top of that spot. So what we do is we have an add-on and that shows a bar that someone has to manually press, sadly. And then after the bar runs out, we do 1 step to the side, always going the same pattern, either left or right, and then backwards once we reach the other corner. So we basically walk in a circle, and by the time we get back to the first ones, those will have cleared, so in case we need to be in this phase for a very long time, we can keep going forever.
Yeah, it's very important that everyone in the 2 groups moves when the timer runs out, because those Smart Stompers are going to start those 8 seconds of dropping down as soon as the first player moves into the next rectangle. So if one guy is too fast, that means that you'll just have to move faster to the next one and you might run out of room that way. So always be together and synchronized, one team, one dream, as Sko would put it.
Now while these Smart Storm phasers and other phases are going on, bosses are still going to be doing their abilities just like in Heroic and Normal, which are the Jump Sequence, Disrupting Roar, which interrupts the cast, Skullcracker, the random rate damage, and Crippling Suplex on the tanks when the transitions from phase to phase happen. And these abilities all get empowered by Pumped Up as they go lower health. Either he jumps more, or there's more Skullcrackers being thrown around, or the cast of Disrupting Roar is faster, so casters have less time to react to the interrupt effect.
Yeah, so the reason why we split the raid into 2 groups is because of that jump sequence. So what happens is that Hans is going to pick one of the furthest away targets of where he is right now, and he's going to jump on him. Then he's going to pick another target, again the furthest away one, and jump back to it, and back and forth and back and forth. So the way we have the 2 groups, he's basically going to jump from one group to another until his jump sequence is done. The reason why you want to do that is because every time he jumps on a player, he does split AoE damage to the people around him. So if it's one person only soaking it, he's going to insta-die. And it also leaves a debuff, which is a dot, and it also increases the physical damage taken, and that debuff stacks. So by splitting up the raid, you reduce the damage that your raid takes, while still having enough players to soak the initial burst damage.
And now while we split up the raid, there's also tactics out there that have the raid stacking up. This way you'll take more raid damage overall, but it's easier to execute, so maybe that's one of the tactics you want to go for, but we're explaining the split up tactic here. Now once you've done the first Smart Stomper phase and the bosses reach 85%, which is when the first phase change is going to happen, one of them is going to pick up the tank and going to be casting Crippling Suplex on the tank. This is a hard hitting ability on both tanks, so you want to have cooldowns up. Luckily you can use cooldowns now while picked up, so you don't need to ask for externals if you don't need them, but you need to have something up, otherwise you're going to die from it.
Yeah, when we actually killed the boss, you couldn't use anything if you're grabbed from the boss. So yeah, that was pretty interesting, but now they fixed it. Now once that's done, Hans is going to jump off the room until the boss reaches 70% HP. And by the way, the boss is 0 HP, so it doesn't really matter which one you DPS. The only thing that Hans is going to do until 70% is a body slam, which is the same ability as he was doing with the jump sequence, only this time he only does one of them instead of a sequence of them, and he targets the tank. Now what you need to do is you just move away from the raid and take that body slam by yourself without hitting anyone else in the raid, which you can do because you're a tank.
Now while you're not dodging the body slams, or well, running away from the raid rather, the raid also has to sidestep the fireplace that you can see coming into the room. Just like Heroic and Normal, there's not much of a difference here. You can stand in between the conveyor belts if you want to, and stand on the edges, which will make you avoid the fire plate that's right behind you, but don't get pushed by the conveyor belt, so that's really clever and handy to use.
Yeah, this phase is arguably the easiest one. The only thing you need to do is avoiding the steering plate, and the thing you should keep track of is the boss's HP, because at 70%, you're gonna transition back to the first phase, the Smart Stompers, and Hans is gonna jump back into the room. And the reason why you need to pay attention is because even though the steering plates, the last ones of them, are gonna be coming down the room, the Smart Stompers might start coming while this is happening, and you don't want your raid to be all over the room while the Smart Stompers start being spawned. Because that means that the room is gonna just be a mess, and you're gonna run out of room. So keep in mind when the bosses are reaching around 70%, and make sure that you go back to one of the corners, so either the diamond mark or the cross mark, as you can see in the video, depending on where the last steering plates are spawning from.
Yeah, sometimes you cannot get into the corner, so we start by calling out the second plates, for example, the second ones from either the left or right, depending on where the opening spot is in the fire plates. If this happens, that you have to start on the second ones, always just stick to the order of acting like it's the second plate that you've been on. So you either go left or right, depending on what corner you started in.
Yeah, another important thing is because things will not always go as planned. So you might have someone accidentally spawning an extra Stomper, Smart Stomper, where he shouldn't be. And it's quite important that the two groups, they are aligned with each other. So wherever the melee DPS are standing, the range DPS need to be 2 rectangles behind, and vice versa. So if one of the two groups fucks up, then the other group, which is doing it properly, unfortunately has to catch up so that they're again aligned. And that's because you want to have range of the boss at all times. And the only way to achieve that is by being perfectly aligned.
Now after this second Smart Stomper phase, which will end at 55% of the boss's HP, we're going to go to a Pattern Stomper phase, which is going to be just like in normal and heroic, where the Smart Stompers are not there, but it's going to be the Stompers in specific patterns. We've marked 4 spots in our video, which we use to stand on.
Now, as you can see here in the picture, these are the 5 patterns, and the reason why we use the square and the circle as the initial markers for the two groups is because for pattern number 1 and pattern number 4, they are the best spots because you can just sidestep without ever having to jump on the treadmill, and you're totally safe from the Stompers. Now for pattern number 2, it's different because instead of standing on the square and the circle, you want to move in to the star and the triangle. Because those spots, again, you can just sidestep without jumping on the treadmill and avoid all of that pattern. Now for the other 2 patterns, number 3 and number 5, it really doesn't matter where you stand, so you might as well just stand on those spots because it's the same wherever you are in the whole room. Now keep in mind that you want the groups to be gathered up because the reason why we're doing this splitting is for the jump sequence, and if one player is standing too far away from his group, he's gonna get destroyed by one of those body slams.
Now while this Pattern Stomper phase is going on, Hans will be jumping around with a jump sequence until the bosses reach 40%, which is when we're going back to one last Smart Stomper phase. Sometimes it might happen that the Stompers stay down as the phase ends, but don't worry, they're not going to deal any damage as you run into them, and you can just get to the corners so you get ready for the Smart Stompers.
Yeah, and it's important to note here that yes, you can run into those Stompers if this bug, which I think it's a bug, happens like it did on our first kill. But in general, you do not want to run into Stompers that have already hit the ground but have not yet been lifted up again. Because if you do so in either of the Smart Stomper or the Pattern Stomper phases, then you're gonna take the full damage and instantly die. So always wait for the Stompers to be lifted back up before you run into them, except for this occasion if this bug occurs.
Now this last Smart Stomper phase, which is the third one, is going to be the hardest of all 3 of them, because the bosses will have been pumped up by getting damaged low health. So they're going to be throwing more Skull Crackers at the rate, the Disrupting Rod is going to be faster, and Hans is going to be jumping more in the jump sequence, so the stacks is going to be stacked up higher and the rate takes more damage overall.
Now hopefully by now you know how to deal with the Smart Stomper phase. It's just like the first 2, and it is the last one that you do. And hopefully you also have your whole raid alive by now, they haven't been stomped. And once the bosses reach 25% health, you're entering the sort of last phase, I guess we can call it. what happens at this last phase is you're gonna be getting the two of the boss's iconic abilities alternating, and it's time-based. So starting off, you're gonna start getting the steering plates. Again, pretty easy, don't really have to worry about it too much. And then after a certain amount of time, you're gonna start getting the pattern stompers yet again. Good news is that the boss is in execute range, and you're probably gonna kill it way too fast to even worry about those things. Now keep in mind that Hans is still gonna be doing the jump sequence, so you wanna again have the raid split into two groups when the jump sequence is happening. A good idea is because at this point you might have dead people, or you don't want to take that much damage at this point. You can actually have solo players standing away from the raid, and when the jump sequence is happening, only one player is going to take the jump and he can just immune it. So hunters can deterrence, mages can ice block it, all of that stuff is possible. Or in the worst case scenario, you can just sacrifice a player just to make sure that the raid doesn't take too much damage that's unhealable.
Yeah, once you reach this last phase, the boss is pretty much dead at this point if the whole raid is alive. There's not much you can fail on compared to the earlier phases. Now as far as debuffs go for this fight, there's only one, and it's really important to track this for healers and tanks, and DPS also wants to keep an eye on it in case you get many stacks. And this debuff is Shattered Vertebrae. This is the debuff that increases your physical damage taken after the boss jumps on you. So keep an eye on this, and as a tank, make sure you have some cooldowns up if they stack up too high, and healers, make sure you heal the raid when the physical dot is on the raid, and the raid has a lot of stacks of this.
And that's basically the whole fight. Now a couple of tips that help you with this fight. Now first off, as we mentioned previously, for the smart stomper phases, which you get 3 of, so it's really important, you want to have some add-on that helps coordinate the whole raid on when to move to the next rectangle. We did it with a weak aura, but there's an add-on that should make it very simple, and you basically need it unless you want to have a player always calling 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and that can get really tiresome, so just use the add-on.
Now another tip for this fight is that you can stand in between the conveyor belts, and if you're on the edge of not the conveyor belt but the line in between, you will avoid both the stompers and the fire plate that's on the conveyor belt next to you. But make sure you're comfortable doing this, because if you mess up, especially the stompers, you're going to get one shot by it, and a dead DPS does no DPS.
Now the last thing that we did not mention, but you can probably guess it, is that when you want to use Bloodlust is at the first time that you get the pattern stompers, because that phase, as we said, is the hardest one, so you want to get done with it as fast as possible.
And that's it for Hans'gar and Franzok guide. We hope you don't get smashed too hard by the patterns, and good luck on the fight.
Leave a comment or feedback below, and remember to subscribe for more Mythic Blackrock Foundry guides.
Awesome.